Hey, this is Ash from Outlier. Welcome back to the Outlier Chinese Character Masterclass, lesson number 3. In this lesson, I'm going to cover the difference between surface structure and deep structure, and why that's important. Now, it may sound a bit abstract, but it's important that you at least know the basics of this. These are two meta-categories. In other words, they fit on top of or they're used to organize other categories, such as stroke order, components, radicals, functional components, how strokes are to be written, etc. It not only tells us how important some of these things are, but when they're important. Deep structure is basically the underlying logic of the writing system. It has to do with things like functional components, internal logic, sound and meaning connections. Its importance lies in showing us how Chinese characters actually work. Surface structure has to do with what a character should look like at a given point in history, or for us, how it looks today. It has to do with things like radicals, strokes, stroke order, non-functional components. Its importance lies in it shows us how to write a character or what it's supposed to look like for a given standard. Taiwan, Hong Kong, and the People's Republic of China, the PRC, have their own standards, which have a lot of overlap but are not exactly the same. Both deep structure and surface structure are important, but are applied at different times. Let's talk about functional components versus non-functional components. We've already touched on the notion of functional components several times, but we really want to nail this down. The key to understanding a given character is understanding how it breaks down into functional components, how those components function, and how they relate to the sound and the original meaning of the character. What is a functional component? Simply put, a functional component is part of a character that's serving a direct function in that character. This usually means that it's giving a pronunciation or a meaning, though the truth is a bit more complicated than that. Functional components belong to the deep structure of a character. Let's take a look at a couple of examples. Let's take the character Bu, for example. It originally meant area, and it's composed of Po and city, or political area. Here, Po is giving a sound, and city is giving a meaning. But Li, to stand, and Ko, mouth, are not. They are merely subcomponents of Po. So we can say in Bu, Po and city are functional components, while Li and Ko are not. Another example would be Duan, which originally meant to stand up straight. It's composed of Li, to stand, and Duan. Here, Li is giving a meaning, while Duan is giving a sound. But Shan, mountain, and beard, are not. Note that as a component, does not mean and or yet. These two are merely subcomponents of Duan. In Duan, Li and Duan are functional components, while Shan and are not. Already, we can see that the notion of functional component is a relative one. In Bu, Li is a non-functional component, while in Duan, it is a functional component. Actually, radicals also work this way. Just because a component appears in the list of radicals does not mean that it's a radical in every character that it shows up in. To summarize, deep structure generally has to do with the expression of sound and meaning within a character. Understanding a character's deep structure allows us to know why it looks the way it does. As such, functional components belong to the level of deep structure. Non-functional components tend to be subcomponents, and as such don't give a sound or a meaning within a character. They belong to surface structure. Surface structure is important because it tells us how to write a character. And I would like to emphasize one more time that both surface structure and deep structure are important. Now I would like to give a brief description of the different types of functional components. Each one of these will be given in greater detail in a future video, so this is just going to be an overview. There are 4 types of functional components, and 2 of these types express a meaning. The first type is form components, which use their pictorial quality to express meaning. The second type is meaning components, which use an acquired meaning to express character meaning. Both of these types are collectively referred to as semantic components. The third type is sound components, which, as you may have guessed, they give a sound. The fourth type is called empty components. They give neither a sound nor a meaning, hence the term empty. Now, each of these will be discussed later on in this course, starting with lesson number 4. It's important to remember that the same component may play different roles in different characters. Okay, let's take a look at li, or li zi pang, and see the different roles it can play in different characters, and then compare that to the role of radical. In bu, the radical is 右边耳朵, and li zi pang is non-functional. In duan, the radical is 立字旁, and 立字旁 is also a semantic component. In wei, the radical is 人字旁, and 立字旁 is the sound component as well as semantic component. In li, the radical is 米字旁, and 立字旁 is the sound component. In la, the radical is 提手旁, and 立字旁 is the sound component. In zhang, the radical is 立字旁, and 立字旁 is non-functional. It's actually just part of xin. Notice that 立字旁, while it does appear on the list of radicals, is only a radical in 2 of these characters, namely in duan and zhang. In duan, it's giving a meaning, while in zhang, it's actually a non-functional component. It also appears in wei, giving both a sound and a meaning, but there it's not a radical. This list of characters shows us that just because a component appears on the list of radicals, that does not mean that that component is always a radical in all the characters that it shows up in. In other words, radical is a role that can be played by a component, not part of its nature. The list also shows us that knowing which component in a character is a radical does not give us any reliable information as to what that component is doing in that character. This means that radicals belong to surface structure because they do not tell us anything reliably about sound and meaning. In this video, which is part A of lesson 3, we went over the differences between deep structure and surface structure. We learned that deep structure is important because it explains the whys, while surface structure is important because it tells us the hows. We also saw that the same component can play different roles in different characters, and also that radicals belong to surface structure. Well, what other elements does surface structure have? I'm glad you asked, because that's exactly the question I'm going to answer in the next video. Until then, see you next time.